Over the next hour, we're going to spend some time together talking about knowledge management. So I should start by introducing myself, tell you a little bit about me. I'm a senior director with Beacon Associates. We are a consulting organization. We do work in both the federal sector and the commercial sector. I've had the good fortune to be involved with ASTD for some time now as they adopted my methodology, Performance DNA, for the HPI certificate program. So I am the co-author of Performance DNA, the analysis methodology. And this is really what I'm going to introduce you to today is one of the applications or one of the projects that we have deployed that in. And I'll walk you through kind of how we got there, some of the concepts, and then walk you through a case study. At the end of my discussion, I do have some printed versions of the case studies to describe it in a little bit more detail for you. So feel free to come up at the end and avail yourself of that. So I get to do a lot of fun stuff as a performance consultant. I get to go in a lot of different environments. I get to go, fun places like the deck of a tugboat. I get to go to commercial lenders in Indonesia. I get to go all over the place. And one thing is common in all of the environments that I find myself in, and that is people have to accomplish something. And as we start this journey talking about knowledge management, I want you to keep that in mind. Knowledge management is still really about people trying to accomplish something. And I can't tell you how often I see in organizations, people forget that. The organization forgets that. The end becomes the means, or the means becomes the end, right? The shiny object is the knowledge management system. And we forget that the only reason we're doing this is so that people can be better at something. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this. All right, what I'm going to do today, a little introduction, I did that. We're going to talk about some terminology and concept. I just want to get us grounded and thinking about some things maybe a little bit differently. The title of my session was A New Paradigm. And I want to kind of change the way you guys think about knowledge, performance, what people do, and how we deal with that in our organizations. I need a volunteer to pick me up when I trip over this. It's just a matter of time. All right. We're going to talk about that new approach at a high level. I'm going to walk you through kind of the parts and pieces of it, and then I'm going to walk you through this case study. And we're going to talk about some of what we encountered and how we helped this organization kind of get out of their own way, if you will. All right, so today's topic, we're looking at a performance-based approach to knowledge management. And in that performance-based approach, it really starts with identifying the critical outcomes in the organization. That's at the job level, at the performer level. What do they need to accomplish? Because that becomes the foundational principle. We're going to link those to knowledge, needs, and sources. Where do they get at the knowledge that they need to accomplish that? What are the sources? What is that knowledge? And then we're going to align that in a learn-do-share paradigm. Because really there's ways that people interact with that knowledge in the production of those outcomes. It's not sort of a single dimension. And then we're going to order it all within a performance portal so that people can get to it when they need it. So really at the very start here, I'd like you to start thinking about knowledge management, not as knowledge management anymore. Let's start to do away with that term. Let's think about it as knowledge performance. How many of us really care about managing knowledge just for the sake of managing knowledge? How many of us would like to leverage knowledge in the service of performance and achieving something more in our organization? Right, so let's use the terminology knowledge performance. That's the important part, the performance. All right, great quote from the former CEO of HP. If only HP knew what it knows, it would make 3 times more profit tomorrow. If we only knew what we know. And think about your own organization. So much time we spend doing what we need to do, right? The tyranny of the present. We're consumed by what we do. We don't even know oftentimes what the other parts of the organization knows. How that could be leveraged. How that services, and how what we're producing services performance in other parts of the organization. If only we knew what we knew. So let me start off. I just want to get a sense in this room how many of us are familiar with or have participated in any of the ASTD HPI courses. We got a few folks. My condolences if I was your instructor. So we're going to have a lot of those principles here. At ASTD has a great certificate program for human performance improvement. That's the HPI program. How many of you currently have a knowledge management strategy or tool in place? a few of us. So a lot of us just kind of starting that journey. Those that do, what changes or results? Are we getting what we hope to out of them? Anybody want to share results? Are we getting positive results? I see some heads going, no, we're not getting what we hoped. We get that a lot of times. We see that a lot. And what I see is, again, pursuit of the shiny object. It's the system, right? It's the knowledge management system that takes over. And at the end of the day, our performers are maybe only slightly better off than they were before. All right, so let's talk about some key terminology. And with there's some concepts that I want you to think about. The first is important, knowledge versus information. They're not the same thing. And yet, so often, I see in these knowledge management projects, they are really just prettied up data management efforts. So what we see is a way, we get together a group, we get together a team, and we say, we're going to do a knowledge management project. And what they start looking at is, what kind of data structures do we have? How are we going to arrange the shared drive? How are we going to organize the project folders? What are we going to do on SharePoint? And they miss the point. That's just data management. And it's a problem. So knowledge is facts, truths, beliefs. There's a lot of things that make up knowledge. In the end, it's accumulated, integrated, and held over time to solve specific challenges. Knowledge is what helps us perform in our job. Knowledge is what helps us accomplish something. Information is facts and data organized to describe, with bits and pieces. It has in its own native state just a piece of information, no intrinsic value. It only matters when we use it and how we use it. And we can't use it if we don't know how to get to it. So some other things, some knowledge needs. Some knowledge needs. How many of your organizations have defined the knowledge needs for your job roles? A couple, good. So you know what the knowledge people need in order to produce particular outcomes. Big step in the right direction. Knowledge sources, do we know where that comes from? Same folks that have identified that, do you know the sources of the knowledge? Another important piece. And then when we think about knowledge and knowledge sources, there are explicit and tacit knowledge sources. So explicit knowledge sources, things like this. Our database, our customer list. Tacit knowledge sources. Those hide oftentimes in a really scary place. That gray space between people's ears. Right? A lot of tacit knowledge is in our experiences, in the things people know through trial and error. Things that are not captured. And there's a wealth of that in our organizations. And we often don't have a structured and consistent way of gathering it. Human performance improvement, I touched on, HPI. That's the theory of human performance where people, we measure their outcomes, their accomplishments in the job. An outcome, you'll hear me say that, you'll hear me say it several times. It's a central concept in performance. And it's important that we understand this because it's central to this approach. I'll tell you now that any job, your job, any job in your organization can be defined in 5 to 9 outcomes. There are only 5 to 9 reasons for any job in your organization why that job exists. And we got to do the heavy lifting and the hard work to understand what outcomes are in those job roles. The difference between good companies and great companies is not what they do. It's what they don't do. Great companies don't waste motion. They focus on the important outcomes because they've defined those. This becomes a principle that drives so much of what you do. It drives your knowledge management. So some sample outcomes, a strategic plan, a quarterly report, a succession plan, a successful proposal. Maybe a list of outcomes, and we'll revisit this. But the notion I want to get across to you is that by beginning with that central concept of there's some poor individual that we expect them to accomplish something or some things. They need to accomplish these outcomes, and we've got to arm them. We've got to give them what they need to get that done. All right, so
business outcomes, listed in something.
So the question is, are these really? So the question is, are these really the business outcomes? And my answer to you is, where outcomes lies at the individual level of performance. So the business has some goal. There are individuals doing jobs. All of us in here need to produce some outcomes. These are just some examples of something that I might produce a strategic plan. That might be an outcome I'm on the hook for, I'm responsible for. So these are things that are accomplished by a person doing a job. And any job we could distill down to, and I've done this in major organizations across the globe. You can be distilled down to 5 to 9 outcomes. So an example of kind of bringing it together, an outcome is a security briefing, and the knowledge need, critical and current security information, and then we have some knowledge sources. So we can make that linkage. In order to accomplish that outcome, what knowledge do you need to have access to, and where is it coming from? So this is starting to take the baby steps and starting to put those concepts together and think about how they connect. I know I'm going down here soon. And finally, the last concept where we're bringing it all together is the notion of a performance portal. So one of the things that I'm going to talk to you today about is the challenge that we put before our performers. We want you to accomplish something, but then we play the great treasure hunt, right? You've got to accomplish something, but you've got to figure out where the information to accomplish that lies. You've got to step back from that and say, what knowledge do I even need to get there? Now, it's not that we're not training. We train them on the task, we train them on the process, the concepts that go into it. But when you're out there performing, and you're out there trying to produce an outcome, it is by and large on you. I've been in scenarios in oil companies, as an example, where technical professionals trying to discover new oil needed to access well data. There are 5 databases where they could find information on the same well. And only through trial and error could they determine which database had better information for a particular aspect of the well tie they were trying to do. This is not atypical. We can laugh about this, but I guarantee I could walk into many organizations represented in this room and find similar scenarios. And so that's really what we need to do, is we need to bring it together, integrate that knowledge that allows the user to access it in the context of what they're trying to produce. A very important notion. So as we started to deploy this, as we started to help this organization, we came on the idea and the notion of LearnDoShare. And as we started looking at these outcomes and the knowledge needs that were required to produce them, and the knowledge sources that they came from, it became very clear that people interacted with this knowledge in one of 3 ways. They needed to learn something about the performance they were engaged in. They needed to do something in the moment that required a knowledge source. Or they discovered something in the course of their performance that was powerful and created value and should be shared back. So there's really 3 ways that people interacted with the knowledge. And so that became, an epiphany to us and to the client. We said, wow, if we start to organize this stuff around performance outcomes and in a paradigm of learn, do, share, where people only have to say, I'm trying to produce a strategic plan, and I need to learn about what we've done before, what our approach to strategic planning is, or I need to do it, so I need to have the strategic planning templates, I need to have the meeting planning guide, whatever it is. Or I figured out something in strategic planning session I want to share back. That was it. We got to that simple of a concept, that simple of a notion. And getting there, it was sort of the old Mark Twain saw, right? Forgive me the length of this letter, I didn't have time to write a short one. Distilling it down took some time. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the journey of how we got there. So we hit on this new approach, this performance-based approach to leveraging knowledge, because we said we really need to link it to what people produce. Not to their job, Be careful about this distinction. We're not linking it to their job because it's a subset, but it's still saying, okay, all underwriters need this body of knowledge. Okay, good, not great. We need to know, we need to take it to the specific level of performance. When I'm trying to accomplish X, which is central to my job, I want everything I need to know right there at my fingertips. So the framework then was first organized on the performer trying to achieve an outcome. And we had to understand what those were. There are not a lot of organizations that have really yet taken this performance-based approach to jobs and define their jobs in terms of what are the 5 to 9 outcomes. So that was the first thing we had to do with this organization. So as we sort of struggled through this, one of the things that came to light is there's a challenge. The challenge, and this is sort of stealing from philosophers, right? But it's sort of the a priori, a posteriori problem. And the problem is, oftentimes, we found in this organization, in order to find a piece of information, you had to know that it existed in the first place. How many of us are in that situation in an organization? To find it, you got to know it's there in the first place, right? So these people are trying to find something around what have we done around helping youth in post-conflict areas. We've done programs on that. To find it, they would have to look, they'd have to know of the particular project and go there, or they'd have to know the person who knew something about the project. So they had to have knowledge beforehand that existed. There was also the situation they had to have knowledge of experience. So they had to know how to go back and find things. They had to find that themselves. So they had to experience how to get to the knowledge. Neither of these scenarios are particularly efficient, are they? So we're asking people, okay, you got to know what you don't know, and what you don't know, you got to figure out on your own. And once you know it, then you'll know that you didn't know it. We can laugh about it, and it is funny when you hear it that way, but that's what we're doing. And that's what very often we end up doing to folks in our organization. Okay, go out there, and they got to find things. Yes, sir.
Let me ask a question, perhaps maybe not going in this direction, but can you help us understand how a traditional task analysis is going to define what the actual critical tasks are for an individual that will result in some eventual boosted outcome? How does this journey that you're talking about differ or is similar to starting in that direction?
That's a great question. For those of you who couldn't hear, the question was, how is this what I'm describing here, how is it similar to or dissimilar to a traditional task analysis of a job role, and how does it link up? And the answer is a task analysis, maybe an example will give you a better answer, but I'll first answer and then I'll give you an example. We'll cover it all. So the quick answer is that the difference is in a performance-based approach, tasks still matter. But we begin by understanding where value is created. So what outcomes, what's the end state? In other words, the question that I will always ask, and I think it's a great question for you to ask, is, as a result of doing this, what do you hope to achieve? Right? So I've walked into, again, I'll give an example from the oil company, not to pick on them, but it comes to mind. I walked in and they were floundering because they had done a traditional task analysis of job roles, and they had some 300 tasks and all of this stuff. And we were able to help them out and coalesce that and say, here are the 5 to 9 outcomes, here are how the tasks link, and now we could take that then and link the knowledge, needs, and sources to the production of outcomes. The critical differentiation here is that activities are important tasks, but not always. How many of us know someone, by a show of hands, how many of us know someone in your organization who looks and is very, very busy, but may not be producing much, if anything, of value? Oh my goodness. That's a shocker. And so that's the differentiator right there, is if you start with outcomes, you can't hide from that. This is where the value is, right? You got these outcomes. Now we understand what tasks are important. Now we understand what knowledge is needed. Now we can look at where that comes from. So we put together the puzzle in a way that starts with, here's what the business needs, and ends with, this is where it comes from, right? We call it the performance chain. Businesses love chains, right? We have supply chains and value chains. Well, here's another one, the performance chain. So we start with the end result, we look at outcomes, we look at work processes, we look at tasks and influence factors, beginning to end. Great question, thank you. All right, I thought there was an interesting quote here on social media because it kind of speaks to what we're talking about. And social media is such a hot topic these days. I'm afraid it kind of touches on knowledge management because people are kind of using it in a way to sort of help folks communicate knowledge and information internally. But it runs the risk of just adding to the Tower of Babel, right? So I think it's great. Social media is an oxymoron at best, right? Because media is just media. And that goes back to my point about data is just data. Information is just information. It's how we use it. It's how it helps us accomplish something. With that in mind, it's important to understand what information people need to know and how they access that in order to achieve results. Again, central principle. Keep that in mind. All right. Let me get you to the process here and how we walk through this. All right. The first thing we did, we took a four-step process, lots of parts and pieces, but again, I tried to distill it down here for you. The first thing is identifying critical job outcomes, the knowledge needs that go along with that, where it came from. And we used a structured approach. You can choose your poison, so to speak. We use performance DNA, but there are plenty of ways to get at that. But the bottom line is, you want to go out and you want to understand the critical job roles from an outcomes perspective. What do they need to produce? Second, we created knowledge maps for each job role and functions based on those outcomes. And this is a powerful activity. And I'll share with you a tool that we stumbled across to link back to social media that was originally designed for use in social media. And we applied it in this scenario to great effect. I'll get to that in a subsequent slide. But creating knowledge maps for each role in the job function. And this is a way of linking, what's the job function, what are the outcomes, what are the knowledge needs, what are the knowledge sources, and are they tacit or explicit? So we map all that out. And then we put it together organizationally so we have a clear picture. Because just think about it. One particular knowledge source might serve multiple job functions, right? So we got to understand how these knowledge sources are pinged or how they're used across the organization. Then we developed that organizational knowledge map, and that gives us the overall flow. So we see how it all connects. And then finally, that enabled us to really coalesce this whole picture into, and we really distilled it down into four central and 2 supplemental performance portals. Then we found that there were really in this organization 4 things or areas that people were engaged in getting something done. And we were able to coalesce it into that. And I'll show you what that looks like when we visit the case study a little bit later. So let's break this down. The first part, identifying the outcomes, identifying the critical outcomes. So use a structured process. Again, there's a number of them out there. But some of the sample questions, and this is just a good start here. Some of the sample questions is, what do you produce in your job that's most important? Right, think about that. Now, again, as a performance consultant, I've had the good fortune of working with a number of global 200 companies. And when I do my performance interviews, I'm talking to the best performers in those organizations. And interestingly, the thing that I hear most frequently, again, global 200, the top performers in those organizations, and what do you think they say when I go and ask them questions around their performance? Thanks for being here. I don't have time for you. No, surprisingly, that's not it. What I hear more often than not is, this is amazing. No one ever asked me. The best performers in our organizations are typically not being asked the questions about how do they produce that success in their job. So by asking them, we're starting to change performance just by asking them to distill down and define how they create it. Said another way, sometimes I'll ask, at the end of the day, when everything's gone well, lights go off and something's left behind that matters, that changes the game for the company. What is it? What have you produced? So here are a few sample outcomes from some of the work we did there. You know, for business development, it was a completed proposal, an organizational business plan, a bid, no bid decision. The decision could be an outcome as well for business development, correct? Project director had a strategy paper and analysis of current trends. So we had a number of outcomes that we derived there. And we did this across their functions. So using the critical outcomes then, we work with them to understand, okay, if you're trying to accomplish this security briefing, what do you need? What do you need to get at? And we were able to define the knowledge needs, the knowledge requirements, and then define where those come from. So we're starting to build this now, and again, we're building it from performance to the finer points. That then took us into the activity of creating the knowledge maps. So this is the outcomes, the knowledge needs, and sources. And it demonstrates the complex relationships. This tool, NodeXL, by the way, just a quick description of it. I stumbled on it. I think it's fantastic for use in this kind of work. It's also free, which in my world makes it doubly fantastic. I wish you could have been up here when I said it's free. Everybody's pencil. So you can do a search. I think it was created, I think, by some folks at University of Maryland and Caltech. I might be misquoting. But they created it to map social networks. And it's just an add-on to Microsoft Excel. I shouldn't say just because it's a significant and robust add-on. But it just plugs right on there. And you can use it to map social networks. If you want to download it and just have fun, you can map your LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, it'll map your Facebook network for you. And you can see sort of all the nodes and connections and how that spans out, which is kind of fun. But for this application, what we did is we put that data that we collected, the outcomes, the knowledge sources, or the knowledge requirements, the knowledge sources, we plugged that all in there. And then it created for us a map organizationally that showed all of these nodes and the ins and outs. How many times was a knowledge source used? And it gives you stats on it all. The inness, outness, betweenness, all of this stuff, right? That enables you to make decisions about how important that knowledge source is, how important that knowledge requirement is. So some great stuff. It identifies that. It helps put that all into a source and a map that you can use. So this is a look at what some of the data in there looks like, right? So we have all of these all these outcomes, and then there's inness and outness and some of the statistics on it. And that, if we blew it up as we did to about half the size of that wall, that is the organizational knowledge map in all its blurry glory for you. If you drill into it, you can see there are, if you could walk all the way up to this, you'd be able to see. You'll be able to see that you actually can see on the computer. You can see how the connections all fit together. So in order to make it easier to use in a validation format, we put it into more of a mind map format by job level, and then validated it with the performers. So we put at the center is a job function, then our outcomes, and then the knowledge sources, or the knowledge requirements, and then the knowledge sources. And you can see on the outmost row there are the knowledge sources. And there's a number of, you may have more than one knowledge source for a particular knowledge need. So we did this for each job role, and we went through a validation process with the performers that we had interviewed to understand, do these knowledge requirements line up? Did we capture it all? So let me give you the case study. Let me walk you through what that looks like as we did it. So starting with the challenge. So we had this, it's a mid-sized international development company, and they do a lot of work in a lot of different areas. They do a lot of work in post-conflict environments. They do a lot of work with youth in danger kind of stuff. A lot of work developing learning outcomes for entire countries. So they do some very important work that affects people's lives. I mean, this is not just, are we going to make another buck, but this is oftentimes life or death. And so the knowledge in their organization serves incredible purpose. So sometimes they're sending people into environments that are very hazardous. I mean, they have work sort of around the globe, and not the places that are on the top 10 travel vacation list. So it became very important, and they were having issues of we've done something before, but we don't know how to find it. A lot of different things. So that was their challenge. So we started into a data gathering process, and we conducted 31 interviews across their organization to gather data. And they had backstops, business development, had a number of functions that we took a look at. In those interviews, we asked the folks to describe their critical outcomes. What did they do to create success? What did they do to create value? And what did they need to achieve in the role? And what was the knowledge they needed? And then what were the sources? So where did it come from? We put that together using Node Excel and putting it into this mind map format, and we were able to validate it and able to come up with the real core set of what was there. So as we distilled it down, we found some top knowledge needs. And the reason that we did this, and why this would be important for you, is you want to take a look first at really where the top knowledge needs are for your organization, right? It's kind of like triage. You want to go first where you can get the most benefit. So we took a look at their top knowledge needs as it started to distill down, and the top knowledge sources, or the top explicit and tacit knowledge sources. Where's this stuff coming from? I mean, we're going to need to know that in order to be able to provide the access to folks, right? So this started to bring things into focus for us. We now understand where the knowledge is in the organization and how it flows. That enabled us to start what I call clustering. Right, we started grouping this knowledge, these top knowledge requirements, the top knowledge sources. And as we did that, we found it really coalesced, as I said, into really 4 core performance areas. People in this organization were really doing one of 4 things. They're either finding and winning new business, they were implementing and supporting current programs, they were developing and advancing the organization's intellectual position in the market, or they're managing and supporting the business. The other 2 are really knowledge areas that are important, but they are more functional, right? Managing my career. There's sort of knowledge around, where do I find my benefit stuff, all that kind of stuff. And then there's working with the organization. They have a lot of external partners, and there's some knowledge needs there. But central to accomplishing the business mission are those first 4 areas. We had some additional findings. Some other stuff rose up to the top. Staff were generally not aware of the knowledge available to them. Now there's a shocker. They just didn't even know it was there. Roughly 20% of the sources, over a quarter of all the knowledge sources, were tacit. People relying on people. In fact, to get at a lot of past performance, we found there was one keeper of all past performance knowledge. She had taken it herself, and she had been there a while, and so whenever you wanted to find out, where did we do a project around youth in conflict areas? Oh, we did some work in Panama, we did some work here. And so she became not only a valuable asset, but also a tremendous bottleneck. All right, so you're able to start finding some of those things. And you start to ask questions. Do those need to be tacit knowledge sources? The answer is no. Many of them could and should be explicit. Many of them we can get out of people's heads. You're not taking away anything, but you're spreading out the ability of people to access this. And that was something that we also needed to focus on. So our solution. Working with the client, we decided that the best course of action was a performance-based knowledge management system. So we decided that approaching, they are a shop that had invested in SharePoint. And all that means. And we were up against, sir.
A quick question. When you talk about the knowledge needs and the knowledge sources,
Yes.
I didn't hear you say much about any gaps you might have found, any actual needs there that were identified as a result of looking at both sides of the ledger.
Yeah. What we looked at is people that were producing the results. And so people producing the results have found a way to get the knowledge that they need to produce those results. So there were people who weren't able to produce results because they had not been brought in on that secret, certainly. So our approach is to work with the people who are achieving the results in order to identify how we can replicate that. That's kind of the heart and soul of the methodology, performance DNA. The DNA means we're going to clone it. So we're finding the genetic code, if you will, for successful performance. So it's a great question. We're not looking for people that can't get it done. We're looking for people who are getting it done. So, good distinction. So we had a defined set of employee and organizational performance requirements. They were working in SharePoint. And additionally, another wrinkle, and I don't know if any of you are up against this. How many of us have SharePoint in our organizations? Ubiquitous. How many of us have SharePoint 2010? How many of us have 2003? Of those who have 2003, do you want to put an ice pick in your eye now, or? So that's what we were up against. We were up against this organization at 2003, and there were significant changes made in usability and how the system worked from 3 to 10, in case you don't know that. So they had already engendered a significant amount of hatred toward SharePoint, because how do some of you use SharePoint in your organizations? There are very few hands that went up that said we had a knowledge management tool. How do you use SharePoint in your organization? Document libraries. You know what most people, and it sounds like most people use it in their organizations that I come into, as Windows Explorer without any of the ease or benefit. Oh, it's just like Windows Explorer, only it takes twice as long, and you're not really ever comfortable that you're getting your stuff saved properly or getting it out. So that's a problem, right? So there was a whole lot of inertia around we don't want to use SharePoint. So people had ad hoc solutions. They're sharing critical business information and knowledge on their local drives, on thumb drives, on every other way. And they had SharePoint, and they had a library system in there. All right, so as we started into this, we looked at the portal design and said, well, let's coalesce this thing into the 4 areas. Because what you want is for people to say, I'm trying to do something. Right? If you know the major things that people do, I'm trying to win some new business. Okay. Well, I'm writing a white paper to advance our intellectual position in the marketplace. Okay. I've got to implement a program. Okay? And so if you've done the work to distill this down into the right things, then people don't have to think about where I need to go. Is it on the S drive? What file library is it in? Here's the central thing to keep in mind. This whole filing approach is dated. It's dying, but it needs to be dead. As I said to my client here, I don't care where this stuff is filed ultimately. When we've done our work, put it all in one big lump. Because if we do our work right, it doesn't matter to the end user. Well, all that matters to the end user is what they're trying to accomplish. That's it. Because you might think of filing projects in one way, and the data team is going to think about it in another way. And IT insists that it's yet a third way. And so we standardize on something, and it requires, again, that we have some understanding of that. Why are we limited by that filing mentality? Any ideas? It's a hangover. We have a great big data hangover. And let me tell you how we got there. After we stopped painting on cave walls and rubbing sticks together, we started carving things on tablets to share information, and then we started writing them in books, and then we invented the printing press so we could put more things in books. And there were a lot of books. And when I needed to find a book, I needed some kind of organization system to find that book, so we organized them by author, by subject, Dewey Decimal System. So we were limited by physical form. We are not in an era limited by physical form. Has anyone in this room happened upon a tool called Google? There goes your physical form. And yet we still have that hangover. We need to see the little tree structure with projects and project 1 and project 2 and our file libraries. We need that, right? No. No. We need enough handles on the information itself, enough handles on the knowledge and how it is being used, that the system can present it to us when we need it in the form, format, and quantity that we require it. So we need to get over this big hangover that we have that's carried forward from the era of books and filing cabinets and all of that stuff. Because it's just getting in our way. It's getting in the way of our performers. Might have been okay when there were 100 books in our corporate library, but we have 100 million documents in our corporate libraries now. So it just doesn't work. And we're creating information at a faster and faster pace. So we coalesce this into the areas that people spend their time in. How do you spend your time? That's what really matters, right? We then applied across that organizational structure this learn, do, share paradigm. And this allows the user then, if you're talking about what I do and how I need to interact with that knowledge, it allows the user to contextualize their experience. So now I can go in there and say, hey, I'm trying to find and win new business, and really I'm at the stage in that where I just need to understand something. You know, what are the regulations around this aspect of find new business? Am I limited here? Or I'm trying to do it. I need a proposal template. I need something about past performance in a particular job that we've done before. Or I found out that if I do ABC with a prospect, they become a client. And I need to share that back. So it allows me, the user, to define the terms that I'm going to interact with the knowledge, rather than the knowledge straitjacketing me. It's now on my terms. I need to produce something. Look, every one of us in this room, I'm sure, is consumed by tyranny of the present. We have a job to do. We have stuff to get done. We have to break out of that to be corralled around by knowledge and where we're going to find it. It's a problem. Finally, that share piece that I've touched on, very important. Very important. Our organizations are, and all of us in this room, are creating wonderful, valuable things. I know I have an associate in this room who would tell you that cobbler's son shoes, right? I have reams of stuff on that laptop that he would love to have his hands on, and I've got to get a project internally done to make this happen. But sharing that back is very important. As we create this stuff, we want to be a living organization. We want to be a learning organization. We want to be a dynamic, performance-oriented organization. As we create things, we want them to become part of the body of knowledge. We want them to become part of how we move forward, how we advance the thing. So we have this share paradigm where information can be shared back at the point of performance, where you're interacting with it. And then there's a process whereby a knowledge manager can review it. It can be peer reviewed, and then it can become part of that body of knowledge. So a very important piece of what we considered with this approach. All right, so a couple of slides here on what it looked like beforehand and what it looks like now. Recognize the SharePoint, familiar SharePoint look. So they had a main intranet portal, and then they had the traditional document library forms, things organized according to per diems, check request forms, that sort of thing. And you could see they had it organized, as oftentimes organizations do, by functional area. Right? We got programs, we got F&C, and these are all functional areas. So this is oftentimes what happens. We go into and organize it around to match the org chart. Right? Well, does your organization only operate in the org chart? Or do things kind of cross functions and you need something from finance, or finance needs something from programs, or what have you? So that's not performance oriented. That's again being limited by structure. So they had been limited by structure. They organized it according to their org chart, and then within each of those they had their file folder structure. In finance we've got ABC, we got contracts, we got whatever. So they had started a project before we came in on knowledge management, and they had gone down the road a little ways, and They had arrived at the beginning of being led by the data. And so this is kind of what they had run up against. And fortunately, we had a conversation and they said, okay, that makes sense. So as we led them through, this is where we arrived. This is one of the examples. And this is Find and Win New Business in the portal, Find and Win New Business. And it's a business development tracker as the outcome. And you can see the organization, and forgive me, it is a landscape format for the computer screen. So this is a screenshot, which makes it a little bit difficult to see. So you can see LearnDoShare, depending on what I'm trying to do with regard to the business tracker. And you can see, in theory, you can see down the left side the outcomes. Right? So I could select a particular outcome. I could say, I'm trying to find and win new business. Generally, that's the area that I'm in. And here's the outcome within there that I need to achieve. And you're presented then with this opportunity to do something or to learn something. So, I want to create a trip report. I want to learn more about USAID, who they happen to work with quite a bit. And so this is the paradigm we arrived at with them. The final piece of the puzzle was putting together a taxonomy. Now, I said to you before, I don't care where this stuff's stored, throw it all in one big file. It requires a little bit of work to get to that. And that really is around the taxonomy and tagging. Right? So SharePoint has some powerful tagging capability, and if you build a good taxonomy, it can support this. So what we did is, using the interview data that we had, using the knowledge sources that we had uncovered, and then using the language from those interviews, we started to create a taxonomy, went through a validation process where we came out the other end with a very robust taxonomy, which is then implemented in SharePoint. What that means is, when I create a document, I am then prompted by SharePoint to let SharePoint know what kind of document it is. How does it fit into our world? And I plug it in there. So now it becomes easily accessible. Now the system pulls it at the right place at the right time. So you can see, one of the things you need to think about as you take this approach is, there is a point of demarcation, right? You have to figure out at what point you're going to move forward. Because there's a whole lot of content that's already there that's going to, over time, require some tagging and assimilation. And we can do some of that. We can do some of that when we go live with the system. Some of that's going to happen through interactions. But moving forward, all of it that comes in and out of the system will become part of that tagged universe of data. Yes, sir?
How many SharePoint business developers were involved in this process? And did you find that you needed a full-time metadata person to document strategy?
So, good questions. We had on the SharePoint team three and one architect. So there were 4 people involved in that aspect of it. On the taxonomy aspect, we had still one SharePoint person involved to take the taxonomy through implementation. But a lot of the rules and everything else we built in. So, this company, this organization, by the way, hired a knowledge manager. So he's the one that has the final authority on updating the taxonomy and maintenance of it. But what's that?
Which is a really big deal.
It was a very important step. That happened about halfway through the project. We were doing a lot of cat herding, and they hired a knowledge manager who had been with Pepsi and Allstate and had some really, really solid chops, and it was a great add to the effort. So, there's a SharePoint team of understanding SharePoint. There's a SharePoint team of understanding the business integration aspects of SharePoint. And then we had a taxonomy expert that we worked with to develop that taxonomy. All right, some additional considerations. All this stuff means nothing if you don't have the organizational structure in place to make sure it works. So you can do all of this great work and have a whiz-bang system and all of that, but if you don't have the organizational structure in place, so you need a reward structure. You need to reward people for playing nice in the sandbox. You need to reward people for engaging with the system, for being early adopters. We put together, at the same time, a piece for them to integrate in their performance management system with some knowledge management specific performance management metrics that people would be rated on as part of their annual review. So that, of course, helps drive behavior, and we felt was extremely important. We encouraged openness and transparency, no hidden agendas. So, there was, at the beginning of the project, a lot of inter-department rivalry. And there was a lot of kingdom building and things going on. So that would be the death of this system, because then one leader decides they're not going to have their people share as much because that gives them a leg up or whatever. So we worked with senior leadership, and we had some facilitated sessions to ensure that all of that was gone. Sharing has to be supported. There were some security issues that were, at times a little draconian, a little heavy-handed, and so there was a lot of issue about what can I really get to, and we had to work through that. You have to be really clear about sort of the limits of that. Trusting shared objectives, and there has to be top-down support, has to be top-level support for this. I think if you don't have that, I don't think if you don't have that. If you don't have that, I have grave doubts that you will succeed. This has to be driven, if this is organizational-wide, this has to be driven from the top. If it's a division effort, it has to be driven by the top of the division. But you have to have that, and you have to have the communication in place to support it.